Imagine a palace that was meant to symbolize power, grandeur, and divine authority. Marble floors, gilded halls, priceless artworks, yet behind every closed door debauchery reigned. Not a single corner of this majestic fortress was spared from excess. Orgies, revelries, a hedonistic spectacle that scandalized even the most decadent courts of history. This was not a rumor whispered by the frightened masses. This was the empire itself, consumed by one man's obsession. The emperor at the heart of this story was more than just a ruler. He was a tyrant of indulgence, a man whose desire to dominate extended far beyond the battlefield and into the private lives of his courtiers, his servants, and his subjects. He transformed his palace into a theatre of lust, a place where morality was suspended and sin became ritual. Yet beneath the scandal and excess lay a darker truth. A ruler whose obsessions did not merely corrupt his court but slowly poisoned the very foundations of his reign. Tonight, we will step into the shadowed corridors of one of history's most infamous palaces. You will witness the pleasures, the betrayals, and the horrors that unfolded behind walls meant to inspire awe. From glittering banquets to secret chambers, nothing in this story is as it seems. If you enjoy hidden truths like this, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. But first, you need to understand the world that gave rise to such decadence and why a palace meant to impress could descend into unbridled chaos. The story unfolds in an era when emperors were considered gods on earth. To challenge them was to risk death. To please them could elevate a family to unimaginable heights. In such times, power was absolute, and the lines between public duty and private indulgence blurred in dangerous ways. The emperor we speak of ruled over a sprawling empire, a civilizer, renowned for its arts, architecture, and military prowess. Yet this same civilization bore the scars of moral corruption, courtly intrigue, and secret vice. Palaces were more than homes, they were symbols. Each marble column, each fresco, each gilded fixture represented centuries of ambition, conquest, and divine favor. Courtiers, scholars, and warriors vied for the ruler's attention, understanding that proximity to the emperor meant influence, and occasionally survival. But in this palace, influence came at a staggering cost. Personal loyalty was not enough. One had to participate, to comply, to be willing to step into the private indulgences that the emperor demanded. The emperor's early reign was marked by promise. His armies expanded borders, and his name inspired reverence. Yet power has a way of isolating, and isolation breeds obsession. Surrounded by yes-men and flatterers, he began to seek pleasures more extreme than any ordinary monarch might dare. What began as lavish banquets and private indulgences evolved into something more sinister, a systemized culture of sexual decadence that ensnared everyone within the palace walls. By the time the rumors spread beyond the capital, the empire had already been reshaped by the emperor's desires. Courtiers whispered in fear, servants trembled in anticipation, and guests who failed to meet the ruler's expectations disappeared from history's records. The palace, intended as a seat of governance and artistry, had become a theatre of lust and power, a warning to those who might underestimate the emperor's reach. And yet, despite the scandal, many could not look away. Curiosity, ambition, and the intoxicating allure of privilege drew them into a world where morality was suspended and obedience meant participating in the unimaginable. The transformation of the emperor's palace began subtly. Initially, it was indulgence in private chambers, discreet trysts that were tolerated because they were hidden and carefully managed. Guests arrived for banquets, but left with whispers of secret gatherings that were as intoxicating as they were forbidden. Courtiers noticed the change, but few dared to speak. After all, the emperor's favor was power, and power demanded compliance. As time went on, the gatherings became more audacious. Orgies were no longer secret. They became structured events, almost ceremonial in nature. Invitations were coveted, participation mandatory. Those who refused risked exile, imprisonment, or worse. The emperor took pleasure not merely in the acts themselves, but in the demonstration of control, the way fear, desire, and loyalty could be manipulated like pieces on a chessboard. The palace staff were drawn into this web. Servants became witnesses, messengers, and sometimes participants. Nobles attended not merely to maintain status, but because exclusion meant being cut off from the power network that dictated everything in the empire. The palace itself seemed complicit, with hidden rooms, secret passageways, and private chambers designed to facilitate the emperor's twisted vision. What made this rise particularly terrifying was its normalization. Over time, what had once been scandalous became routine. Courtiers learned to smile, nod, and participate, even as their consciences screamed otherwise. The emperor's obsession had reshaped the palace culture. Every meal, every performance, every official ceremony became intertwined with the underlying truth. Participation was survival. And yet the emperor's actions, while extreme, revealed a human obsession, a relentless pursuit of gratification and control. He was both predator and puppet master, orchestrating the lives of those around him, blurring the line between pleasure and punishment. Even those outside the palace began to notice as rumors of debauchery spread across the empire, and as the indulgence escalated, the emperor's grip on morality, politics, and even loyalty became dangerously intertwined. What began as private pleasure was evolving into public scandal, a storm gathering behind the gilded walls. The turning point came when the emperor's obsession began to undermine not only his reputation but the stability of the court. A conflict arose, subtle at first, between those who were willing to indulge and those who sought to maintain traditional decorum. Courtiers began to plot quietly, alliances shifted, and the emperor's control, though formidable, faced unexpected resistance. Betrayal became a currency as dangerous as gold. Some courtiers feigned participation while secretly undermining the emperor's plans. Others attempted to expose his excesses to rivals, hoping to exploit the scandal for personal gain. The palace, once a haven for absolute power, became a battlefield where desire, fear, and strategy collided. The emperor's obsession intensified in response. He expanded the orgiastic gatherings, adding new layers of ritual and spectacle. Secret passageways and hidden chambers multiplied, creating a labyrinthine palace in which no one could truly be safe from his gaze. Participation became performance. Fear became pleasure. The line between coercion and consent blurred into near oblivion. At the same time, whispers began to reach the broader empire. The emperor's enemies, both within the court and in distant provinces, seized upon the rumors. Political tension mounted. What had started as a private indulgence was now a weapon, wielded by rivals who could turn the emperor's obsession against him. His influence, once unassailable, began to waver, and the decadence of his palace became a liability rather than a source of power. The turning point was not marked by a single confrontation, but by a convergence of obsession, betrayal, and political pressure. The emperor had transformed pleasure into authority, yet in doing so, he had planted the seeds of his own undoing. The palace, a monument to excess, was now a trap for both himself and those who dared to navigate its shadowed corridors. The consequences of the emperor's obsession were devastating. Internally, the palace became a theater of paranoia and control. Those who participated willingly were forever marked by complicity. Those who resisted were punished or disappeared. Morality, law, and even diplomacy were subordinated to the rituals of desire. Every decision became tainted by fear, manipulation, or lust, eroding the integrity of governance and the trust of the court. Externally, the empire began to feel the strain. Nobles and governors questioned the emperor's judgment. Military campaigns suffered from neglect, as the emperor's attention was consumed by pleasure rather than strategy. Rivals used the scandal to foment rebellion, citing moral decay as justification for political action. In short, the emperor's private indulgences had become a public liability. Yet the human cost was perhaps the most harrowing. Servants and courtiers were coerced into acts they did not desire. Trust was shattered, families were destroyed, and the emperor himself, consumed by obsession, became increasingly isolated. He was a man surrounded by luxury and pleasure, yet imprisoned by his own desires, unable to escape the very empire he had built. And as history would later record, the Palace of Indulgence left scars far beyond the gilded walls. Generations of officials, courtiers, and descendants would remember the excess, the betrayal, and the corruption, shaping the perception of the emperor as both brilliant and monstrous. The palace had become a symbos. Not of glory, but of caution. Power without restraint leads to ruin. The darker the pleasure, the sharper the consequences. The emperor's legacy, once destined for awe, became synonymous with debauchery, a reminder that absolute power and absolute indulgence are a dangerous combination. In the aftermath of his reign, historians struggled to reconcile the emperor's achievements with his personal depravity. He had expanded territories, inspired art, and commanded armies. Yet these accomplishments were overshadowed by the scandal of his private indulgences, which had eroded trust, destabilized governance, and left human suffering in their wake. The victims, courtiers, servants, and others caught in the palace's shadow, remind us that history is rarely kind to the powerless. Their lives, coerced or destroyed, humanize the story, revealing the toll of unchecked desire and authority. Behind the opulent ceremonies, the laughter and the music lay fear, pain, and exploitation. Yet there is a cautionary lesson in this tale. Absolute power, when combined with obsession, creates chaos. Morality, loyalty, and governance cannot survive unrestrained indulgence. The emperor's story is a testament to human weakness, to the seductive nature of control, and to the dangers of allowing desire to dictate policy. Today, the palace may stand as a historical site, a symbol of architectural beauty, but the story that unfolded within its walls serves as a warning. Even the most magnificent structures can harbor darkness. Even the most revered rulers can be consumed by their own obsessions. Subscribe for more, share this story, and tell me in the comments what shocked you most. Because the Emperor's Tale is not just history, It is a mirror, reflecting how ambition, desire, and power can collide with devastating consequences, leaving both legacy and morality in ruins.